I still remember the day I decided to propose to Lucy. It was the culmination of 5 years of love, shared dreams, and promises. At 31, I thought I'd finally found my forever in her. Planning the wedding was supposed to be the happiest chapter of our story. But as I sit here now, staring at the empty side of the bed, I realize how wrong I was about everything. To understand how it all fell apart, I need to go back to the person who played a key role in this unraveling, my younger sister, Emily. Emily and I had always been at odds. Growing up, our relationship was anything but harmonious. She was 3 years younger than me, and no matter what I did, it seemed like she had to do it better, or at least try to. Whether it was academics, sports, or even relationships, Emily had an almost pathological need to outshine me. One memory still haunts me. I was 10, and she was 7. I had just won a spelling bee at school, a big deal for me, and our parents took us out for ice cream to celebrate. As I basked in their praise, Emily had a meltdown. Right there in the ice cream shop, she screamed about how unfair it was and demanded that our parents quiz her spelling skills on the spot. That wasn't an isolated incident. As we grew older, her competitiveness morphed into something more insidious. If I got an A on a test, she'd study obsessively until she did the same. When I won an art competition at 12, she created a scene during the celebratory dinner, claiming she could draw better and demanding to show everyone her sketches. What should have been joyful moments for me often ended in chaos, thanks to her need to center herself. Our parents tried everything to mend the rift. Family therapy sessions were a regular feature of our teen years, but they only seemed to entrench Emily's resentment. She barely spoke during sessions, her arms crossed in defiance, leaving therapists at a loss. By the time I was in college, I'd resigned myself to the fact that we'd never get along. I never could have imagined the depth of her resentment, or how far she'd go to act on it. By the time I graduated college, Emily and I barely spoke unless we had to, and even then, it was strained. I focused on my studies and building a future, while Emily seemed stuck, constantly shifting majors and struggling to figure out her path. She was still in college, drowning in academic probation, while I was celebrating landing my dream job at a prestigious marketing firm. The role was everything I had worked for: great pay, exciting projects, and the chance to make a real name for myself in the industry. When I shared the news at a family dinner, I expected polite congratulations, maybe even some pride from Emily. Instead, she erupted. Her face twisted in anger as she accused me of being a show-off and hogging the spotlight, her words dripping with bitterness. "Why do you always have to be the golden child?" she spat. "Why can't you ever just fail for once so someone else can have a chance?" Her outburst silenced the table. Our parents tried to calm her down, reminding her that my success didn't diminish her own potential, but she wasn't hearing it. She stormed out of the house, slamming the door so hard that a framed photo fell off the wall. That night, I overheard her on the phone, venting to a friend. "He's not going to keep rubbing this in my face," she hissed. "I'll make sure he gets knocked down a peg or two." At the time, I brushed it off. It wasn't the first time she'd thrown a tantrum, and I figured it was just her usual theatrics. I was wrong. So wrong. Just days before I was supposed to start my new job, I got an email from HR. The tone was clinical, detached. They had received disturbing materials related to my background, emails, screenshots, and social media posts attributed to me, all containing hateful, discriminatory language. The evidence was fabricated, of course, but it didn't matter. The company had decided to rescind my offer. I was devastated. My dream job, gone in an instant. As I sat staring at the email, numb with disbelief, it didn't take long for me to connect the dots. Emily was the only person who knew enough about me to pull something like this off. When I confronted her, she denied it at first, but the smirk on her face betrayed her. "You've always been the favorite," she said, her voice trembling with anger. "It's about time you got a taste of failure." Her admission left me speechless. She had gone out of her way to destroy something I had worked years to achieve, all out of spite. That was the day I cut her out of my life. I told her I never wanted to see or speak to her again, and I meant it. The following months were some of the hardest of my life. I had to start over, clawing my way back up with a lower-paying job, rebuilding my reputation from scratch. But I did it. Slowly, painfully, I put the pieces back together. By the time I met Lucy 5 years ago, I had finally found some stability. My career was back on track, my social circle was solid, and life felt like it was moving forward again. Lucy was everything I thought I wanted in a partner: kind, funny, supportive. On our 4th date, as we shared stories over late-night coffee, I told her about Emily. I laid it all out: the constant competition, the jealousy, and the way she had sabotaged my career. Lucy listened quietly, her face full of understanding. "Family relationships can be complicated," she said gently. "But I respect your decision to cut her out. You have to protect your peace." That meant the world to me. For the first time in a long while, I felt like someone truly understood where I was coming from. Over the years, Lucy and I built something I thought was unshakable. She was my rock, and when I proposed 6 months ago, it felt like everything had finally fallen into place. But as we started planning the wedding, things began to shift. It was subtle at first: offhand comments about family, little nudges to let bygones be bygones. Lucy started bringing up Emily, suggesting that maybe it was time to forgive and move on. Every time she did, I shut her down. "Lucy, I've made my boundaries clear," I told her one night as we reviewed the guest list. "Emily is not a part of my life. She won't be a part of our wedding either." At first, Lucy seemed to let it go, but I could tell she wasn't happy. The topic would come up again and again, like an itch she couldn't stop scratching. "People change," she'd say. "Maybe she regrets what she did. Maybe it's time to heal." But I knew Emily. I knew the damage she was capable of. The thought of seeing her at the wedding, the happiest day of my life, made my stomach churn. I stood firm, hoping Lucy would understand. She didn't. The breaking point came one evening as we finalized the guest list. We were sitting on the couch, the list spread out in front of us, when Lucy brought up Emily again. "Brian?" she said softly, her eyes full of hope. "Don't you think it's time to forgive her?" "She's your sister," I sighed, feeling the familiar weight of frustration settle on my chest. "Lucy, we've been over this. I'm not inviting her." She didn't back down this time. "But it's been years. Don't you think she might have changed?" "Changed?" I snapped, my voice rising. "She didn't just hurt me, Lucy. She sabotaged my entire life. That's not something you just change from." Her face hardened, and for the first time, I saw real anger in her eyes. Maybe she deserves a chance to make it right. I stared at her, disbelief washing over me. "Why are you pushing this so hard? Whose side are you even on?" "Family is important, Brian," she shot back. "I can't imagine cutting someone off forever." Her words hit like a slap. "You think this is about some petty grudge?" My voice shook. "She didn't steal my lunch money or spread some high school rumor. She ruined my career. She destroyed years of my life." Lucy looked away, her arms crossed tightly. "You're being stubborn," she said quietly. "You're punishing her for something she did when she was young." That was it. The dam broke. "A mistake?" I said, my voice sharp with anger. "That wasn't a mistake, Lucy. It was cruelty. And the fact that you can't see that makes me wonder if you even know me at all." She flinched, but didn't reply. The silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. Finally, she stood and walked out of the room, leaving me alone with the list of names that now felt meaningless. The days after that argument were tense, to say the least. Lucy barely spoke to me, and when she did, her words were clipped and polite, as if we were strangers sharing the same space. I hated it. I hated the cold distance, the way it felt like a wall had been erected between us overnight. We'd been through so much together. How had it come to this? I told myself it was just a rough patch, that we'd figure it out. But deep down, something felt broken. A week later, I came home from a long day at work, tired and drained. I opened the door to find Lucy sitting at the dining table, her hands trembling as she clutched her phone. Her face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed like she'd been crying for hours. The air in the room was heavy, thick with something unspoken. "Lucy?" I asked cautiously, setting my bag down. "What's going on?" She looked up at me, her face crumpling under the weight of whatever she was about to say. "Brian, I need to tell you something," she whispered, her voice shaky. My stomach sank. "What is it?" She hesitated, her fingers twisting the hem of her sweater. I reached out to Emily." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I stared at her, unsure if I'd heard her right. "You what?" I thought it was the right thing to do," she stammered, tears streaming down her face. "I found her on social media a few months ago. We've been talking and She choked on the words. "I invited her to the wedding." The world tilted beneath me. I felt like the ground had been yanked out from under my feet. "You invited her?" My voice came out louder than I intended, trembling with disbelief and anger. "After everything I told you? After I made it clear she wasn't to be a part of my life?" "I'm sorry," Lucy sobbed. "I thought it was the right thing to do. I thought if she came, maybe you two could finally make peace." "No," I snapped, my voice sharp and cold. "You went behind my back. You did exactly what I asked you not to do. You betrayed me, Lucy." "Brian, please," she pleaded, standing and reaching for me. "I love you. I was just trying to help." "Help?" I let out a bitter laugh, hollow and cold. "You think this is helping? You knew how I felt about her, and you did it anyway. This isn't love, Lucy. This is manipulation." She froze, her tears falling harder now. "I thought she'd changed," she whispered. "I really did, but I was wrong." I crossed my arms, my chest tight with anger and heartbreak. "What are you talking about?" "She said things," Lucy admitted, her voice trembling. "Horrible things. When I told her about us, she laughed. She called you a loser and asked how I could ever be with someone like you." Her words stung like fresh wounds. Of course, Emily hadn't changed. Of course, she would lash out, even at someone trying to extend kindness. I should have seen it coming, but the pain of Lucy's betrayal overshadowed everything else. "Do you understand now?" I said quietly, the fight draining out of me. "Do you see why I didn't want her in my life?" "I do," Lucy said through sobs. "I see it now, Brian. I was wrong to reach out to her. I thought I was helping, but I only made things worse. I'm so sorry." Her apology hung in the air, but it did nothing to ease the ache in my chest. "You should have trusted me," I said, my voice steady but full of hurt. "You should have listened when I told you what I needed." "I thought love meant forgiveness," she whispered. "Love also means respect," I replied. "And I can't respect someone who won't respect my boundaries." Lucy crumbled into tears, but I couldn't bring myself to comfort her. My heart felt shattered, the trust between us irreparably broken. We were supposed to be a team, but she had made a decision that cut me to my core. That night, I slept in the guest room. The silence of the apartment felt like it was suffocating me. I stared at the ceiling for hours, my mind racing with anger, betrayal, and heartbreak. By morning, the weight of what had happened was inescapable. Lucy was packing her things when I stepped into the living room. Her suitcase sat by the door, and she looked at me with tear-streaked eyes. "Are you sure this is what you want?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "No, Lucy," I said, my throat tight. "This isn't what I want, but it's what you've left me with." She nodded, wiping her eyes. "I never meant to hurt you." "I know," I said, my voice cracking. "But that doesn't change what you did." She turned and walked out the door, the sound of it closing behind her echoing through the empty apartment like the final note of a song I never wanted to hear. After Lucy left, the apartment felt hollow. Every corner reminded me of her, the laughter we'd shared, the plans we'd made, the life we were supposed to build together. The quiet was unbearable, a constant reminder of how everything had fallen apart. But more than anything, it was the betrayal that weighed on me. I had always believed that love was built on trust. And now, the one person I thought I could count on had broken that trust in the most painful way. The next few days passed in a blur. I went through the motions, canceling the wedding venue, notifying the caterers, calling off the florist. Each conversation felt like tearing off another piece of a dream I'd held so tightly. Friends tried to be supportive, but I could see the confusion in their eyes. "Are you sure you're doing the right thing?" one of them asked over the phone. "I mean, it's just your sister. Can't you forgive Lucy for trying to help?" But it wasn't just about Emily, and I couldn't explain that to someone who didn't understand. It was about boundaries. Boundaries I'd set for a reason. Lucy had crossed them, and that kind of damage wasn't easy to repair. Not everyone was so subtle in their judgment. Lucy's family made their opinions clear. Her mother called me a heartless jerk for throwing away a perfect relationship over sibling drama. Her brother, someone I'd considered a friend, sent me a scathing text about how I was making the biggest mistake of my life. It stung, but I ignored them. They didn't know the full story, and even if they did, they probably wouldn't understand. People are quick to forgive when they're not the ones who've been burned. My own parents weren't much better. They called repeatedly, leaving voicemails that swung between pleading and guilt-tripping. My mom's voice trembled as she begged me to reconsider. "Brian, please," she said in one message. "This could be a chance to heal the family. Don't let this tear everything apart." But it wasn't me who had torn everything apart. It was Emily, and now Lucy. The people who were supposed to protect me had crossed lines I couldn't forgive. One evening, after a long day at work, I came home to find an email from Emily. The subject line read, "I'm sorry." I almost deleted it without reading, but curiosity got the better of me. The email was long and filled with apologies. Emily claimed she'd been in therapy for years, trying to work through her jealousy and resentment. She admitted what she'd done to me was unforgivable, but said she wanted to make amends. She wanted to be my sister again. I stared at the words, feeling nothing but exhaustion. Therapy or not, an apology couldn't erase the scars she'd left. It couldn't undo the humiliation of losing my dream job or the years of struggle to rebuild my life. I closed the email without replying. That weekend, I tried to process everything. My mind kept circling back to Lucy. I missed her, her laugh, the way her eyes sparkled when she talked about something she loved, the quiet moments we'd shared. But every time I thought about reaching out, the pain of her betrayal came rushing back. I went for a run, hoping the physical exertion would clear my head. Instead, it only amplified the storm of emotions. By the time I got back to my car, drenched in sweat, I felt just as lost as before. Was I being stubborn? Was losing Lucy worth holding this grudge? But it wasn't just a grudge. It was a wound. She hadn't respected the boundaries I'd worked so hard to establish. No matter how much I loved her, I couldn't ignore the sting of betrayal. A few days later, at work, my boss Ashley pulled me aside. "You doing okay?" she asked, her tone uncharacteristically soft. I forced a smile. "Getting there." She nodded. "Sometimes standing your ground is the hardest thing to do, but it's worth it." Her words stuck with me. I didn't feel strong or brave, but maybe she was right. Maybe choosing myself, choosing my peace, was the right thing to do, no matter how much it hurt. That night, I deleted Emily's email. I didn't need to read it again. I already knew my answer. The days turned into weeks, and slowly, life started to feel less heavy. The apartment, once filled with Lucy's presence, felt emptier than I thought possible. Her side of the closet was bare, the bathroom shelves half empty, and every time I reached for something, I'd catch myself expecting to hear her voice in the background. At first, the silence was unbearable. I threw myself into work, tackling every project that came my way, trying to drown out the noise in my head with endless tasks. My boss, Ashley, kept checking in, her quiet encouragement a small lifeline in the chaos. But even work couldn't completely distract me. The weight of everything lingered, the betrayal, the shattered trust, the life that had slipped through my fingers. Then, one evening, my mom called. I almost ignored it, but something in me told me to pick up. "Hi, Mom," I said, my voice flat. "Brian," she said, her tone careful. "We miss you." Please come to dinner this weekend. We need to talk." I hesitated, my gut telling me this was a bad idea. But maybe some small part of me still wanted to believe they could understand, that they could see my side. "Fine," I said, "but I'm not staying long." Saturday evening came, and I found myself standing outside my parents' house, the familiar porch now tinged with unease. The door opened before I could knock, and my mom pulled me into a hug. "I'm so glad you're here," she said softly. As I stepped inside, the first thing I saw was Emily sitting at the dining table. My stomach turned. "What is she doing here?" I demanded, my voice sharp. "Brian, please," my dad said, his expression strained. "We just want to help you make peace." "You ambushed me," I said, my anger bubbling up. "Again." "We thought if you two just talked, you could finally heal," my mom said, tears welling up in her eyes. I shook my head, disbelief and bitterness twisting in my chest. "You don't get it. You never have." "Brian, wait," Emily spoke up, her voice trembling. "I just want to apologize." Her words felt hollow, empty. I turned to my parents. "You're still trying to fix something that's broken beyond repair. You can't force this." "We just want our family back," my dad said, his voice cracking. "This is your family now," I said coldly. "A family where trust doesn't matter and betrayal is swept under the rug. I told you where I stood, and if you can't respect that, I don't know what else to say." I turned and walked out, my mom's sobs following me down the steps. The cold night air hit my face, and for the first time in weeks, I felt clear. I had drawn my line, and I wasn't going to cross it for anyone. In the days that followed, the emptiness of the apartment no longer felt suffocating. Instead, it felt like a space where I could finally breathe. I began to let go of the relationships that had caused me so much pain. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. I spent more time with friends, rediscovering the joy of simple things: a casual dinner, a hike along the cliffs, a late-night conversation under the stars. These moments reminded me of what real connection felt like: honest, untainted by betrayal or expectation. At work, I threw myself into projects, and for the first time in a long time, I felt proud of what I was accomplishing. One day, Ashley pulled me aside after a meeting. "You've been doing great, Brian," she said with a smile. "I can see the focus in you. Keep it up." Her words stuck with me. Despite everything, I was still standing, still moving forward. One weekend, I decided it was time to clear out the apartment. As I went through drawers and closets, I found pieces of my life with Lucy: a stray earring, an old movie ticket stub, a grocery list in her handwriting. Each item carried a memory, but instead of feeling overwhelmed by nostalgia, I felt a strange sense of peace. Letting go didn't mean forgetting. It meant choosing to move forward without the weight of what could have been. I packed the items into a box, sealed it, and set it aside. The apartment felt different afterward, lighter, like it finally belonged to me. I rearranged the furniture, added a few plants, and hung up new artwork. These small changes were a reflection of the person I was becoming, someone who valued their boundaries and their peace. A few weeks later, at a rooftop party downtown, I met someone new. Her name was Claire, and she had an easy smile and a knack for making conversation feel effortless. We talked about books, road trips, and the best barbecue spots in town. She didn't pry into my past or ask questions I wasn't ready to answer. She just enjoyed the moment with me, and that was refreshing. As the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, she turned to me and said, "Feel like grabbing a milkshake?" I laughed. "Sure, as long as I don't have to sing karaoke." She laughed back, and for the first time in months, I felt a warmth I thought I'd lost. That night, as I stood by the window of my apartment, looking out at the city skyline, I realized something. I wasn't over everything that had happened, not Emily's betrayal, not Lucy's broken trust. The scars were still there, but they didn't define me. They were just a part of my story, not the whole of it. I didn't know what the future held, but I was okay with that. One step at a time, I'd figure it out. Because sometimes standing your ground means losing people you love, but it also means finding yourself. and that's a trade I was finally willing to make story too. My stepbrother embezzled his own education funds and falsely accused me of stealing them, causing my entire family to shun me. Hey folks, how are you? Let me tell you about the turmoil that engulfed my entire existence. I never thought I'd share this, but a buddy of mine recommended it so I could see various viewpoints. So let's get started. When I was 10, my father, who was 26, died. It was difficult. My mother and I were allowed to work things out alone for the initial several years. Together, we seemed to be in survival mode. Like best friends, we were really close. She was my pillar of strength, my staunchest ally, and to be honest, the sole reason I survived the death of my father. After that, everything seemed to change suddenly when my mom met Paul at a business conference. They were married in 6 months, and our family dynamic completely changed. At first, Paul appeared okay, but I wasn't happy about it. After everything we'd gone through, he was courteous, kept his distance, and appeared to truly enjoy seeing my mom smile. It seemed like enough justification to give the man a chance. Eric, Paul's son, was 10 years old, the same age as myself, and my entire life changed when he moved in with us. It was evident from away that Eric wasn't comfortable with this new family. I understand, it's significant when your parents get married again. Eric, however, wasn't only adapting, he behaved as though my mother and I were intruders. At first it was subtle, but it quickly became clear that this child was danger. In every circumstance, Eric had a knack of making himself appear to be the victim. He would eat all the goodies I had put away for later, blame me for the mess in the home, and then make the most straight-faced lie you've ever seen. He informed Paul that I had shoved him after he smashed a light while playing tag inside the home. He also claimed to have witnessed me eating the remaining birthday cake that my mother had kept for me the previous evening. Eric was the golden child who could do no wrong, and Paul always believed him without question. But it was Eric's deliberate attempts to sabotage my mother that truly infuriated me. In an attempt to give her the impression that I was a bully, he would fabricate stories about things I allegedly said or did. "While you weren't home," Alex shouted at me. He would say, or Alex said that he no longer enjoys living here. It was just complete bullshit. However, Paul absorbed it, and my mother began to feel the effects. It got to the point where it began to cause friction between Paul and my mother. I could hear fights from my room late at night every time Paul fell for one of Eric's falsehoods. Initially, however, my mother had always been my strongest supporter. Eventually, though, she began to doubt herself. She told me to disregard Eric and go on since she didn't want to argue with Paul. It's simple to say when you're not held accountable for anything. As we grew older, things became worse. From obnoxious little brother feelings to outright pandemonium, Eric escalated. By the time he reached middle school, he was the kind of child who would skip class, sabotage his assignments, and accuse the teachers of being to blame for his poor marks. He had some acquaintances in high school who were all about partying and violating the rules. When their parents were out of town, they would have home parties, cut school, and damage things. Naturally, Eric managed to give the impression that I was involved. If he was discovered to be doing foolishly, he would claim that I initiated it. Eric would claim that Alex missed class first if a teacher called Paul about it, so I assumed everything was all right. There was nothing I was missing. I was either at my part-time job at a bookshop or in class. However, facts didn't matter to Paul. He just cared about his golden boy's happiness. He would punish us both, even though I had nothing to do with it, to be honest. By our junior year of high school, I had given up on attempting to have my name cleared. The more proof I had, the less it mattered. Paul always managed to make me seem like the villain. Simply said, "You're more adept at concealing your actions." He would claim that occasionally my mother would stand up for me, but Paul would silence her. "Simply because he is your son, you are biased." She began choosing fewer conflicts over time, and I couldn't really blame her. Since Paul and Eric were in charge, and the entire home seemed like a battleground, I avoided them. I worked my part-time job, concentrated on my studies, and spent as much time as possible at my best buddy Jake's place. My safe haven was Jake. He was the only one who truly knew what I was going through since he had witnessed Eric's shit firsthand. "One day that child will crash and burn." I hoped he was right, Jake used to say, but I didn't imagine I'd be here to witness it. Eric's life, meanwhile, was collapsing. He barely made it through high school, and his grades were horrible. Paul was quite irate that he was not accepted into any institutions. It was because it made Paul seem terrible, not because Eric had messed up. In the meantime, I received a partial scholarship to a reputable public university. That seemed like my one major victory since I worked hard for it. Naturally, though, Eric pretended that it was a personal jab at him. Every time college rolled around, he would say, "You think you're so much better than me now? Having everything handed to you must be pleasant." This man's chutzpah was unbelievable. I put a lot of effort into getting the scholarship. He was unable to even get into a community college, thus his actual $80,000 education cash was lying in the bank unutilized. Eric had somehow coasted through life without any meaningful repercussions by the time we were both out of high school. It wasn't that he didn't make a mistake. He made many mistakes, but he had a talent at fabricating an excuse to blame someone else when he was discovered, and I was that someone else 9 times out of 10. Allow me to demonstrate Eric's genius-level deception during his alleged gap year, which was actually simply a pretext for him to spend time with his shady pals and play video games. Eric made the decision to change his ways. He told Paul and his grandparents that, at least, he told them a tearful tale about how he was at last prepared to put his future first and make them proud. They devoured it despite the fact that it was a crock of garbage. Paul even allowed him to use the office computer so he could begin looking into scholarships and universities. A huge error. Paul became aware that the printer was using up paper and ink much more quickly than normal a few months into his gap year. Eric said that he had been printing out study materials and college applications when he was questioned about it. That in itself ought to have been a warning sign. Eric lacked the drive to learn, not to mention the grades required to apply to most universities. Paul, however, took him at his word. As is customary, the actual difficulty began 4 years ago as a result of the accumulation of these instances. Let me explain it to you. Recall my earlier reference of the $80,000 college fund. When Eric was born, his grandparents had prepared it for him. That sum of money was meant to be his golden ticket to a better future, a vast opportunity that was only waiting for him to take action. However, Eric wasn't exactly the kind to succeed on his own. He didn't get admitted to any reputable institutions and had spent the most of high school barely making ends meet. Despite their disapproval, his grandparents agreed to let him use the funds for community college, with the proviso that he may transfer to a 4-year institution if his grades improved. It seems sensible, doesn't it? Well, not in Eric's opinion. He did not consider the funds to be an investment in his schooling. He was free to live his life as he pleased. Throughout his gap year, he had been making withdrawals from the money. Start with little quantities, just enough to hide new clothing, technology, and anything else that drew his attention. However, the withdrawals increased with time. Paul discovered that the account was nearly depleted. It becomes crazy at this point. Eric chose to place the blame on me, rather than take responsibility for it himself. I was envious that he had a college fund, so he informed Paul that I had been sneaking into his office, where he stored all the crucial paperwork, and that I had stolen the account details to transfer the money to myself. He further said that he had witnessed me acting strangely several times in the office. Let me just state this now. I had no idea where Paul stored his office records, much less how to get to Eric's college money. I didn't need to, and I would never tap that account. I had a part-time job, my own scholarship, and a well-defined plan for the future. Why would I jeopardize everything to steal from a high school dropout? Eric didn't stop there either. He was skilled at the game. He made phony emails with proof that appeared to be from me and inquired about sending big quantities of money. He even placed a USB disk containing what he said were account screenshots and access instructions in my room. To be honest, I have to give him credit for the most intricate setup I've ever seen. The man threw himself into it. I was caught off guard when Paul accosted me. Eric was already sitting in the living room, looking smug and self-righteous, when he summoned me in. Even though my mother was present, she appeared more perplexed than anything else. Paul wasted no time. "I need to know why you did this, Alex," he said. I didn't know what he was discussing. What did you do? Sincerely unsure, I asked. Eric then interrupted, feigning alarm and making theatrical pauses. Like he was doing me a favor by being wounded, he added, "Alex, I didn't want to believe it. However, I did see you. You were walking into Dad's office when I noticed you." After that, the funds began to vanish. Paul interrupted him and began presenting the proof, including screenshots of the purported transaction, the planted USB drive, and the phony emails. I was taken aback. Knowing there was nothing you could do to stop it was like watching a car crash in slow motion. I can still clearly recall this. Desperate to convince them of my logic, I attempted to defend myself, examine the bank's records, speak with the bank, submit a police report, make every effort to show that I didn't do this. I have no idea how to get into the account. However, Eric had done too much planning. There was no reason to distrust the phony proof because it was perfect. And without hesitation, Paul accepted it. Silently, I went to my mother and begged her to stand up for me, to intervene and put an end to this chaos. She simply remained there staring at me as if I were a stranger, her face brimming with tears. At last, she spoke something. "I'm so sad about you. It's unbelievable that you would do such a thing." Those words sliced like a dagger through me. "You know me, Mom." Trying to remain steady, I said, "I didn't do this, you know. I wouldn't, you know?" She didn't answer. She avoided looking into my eyes and simply shook her head. Paul glared at me as he moved forward. "I'm not surprised by this. Have you not always been envious of Eric? You have been nothing but problems ever since you entered our house. Do you now believe that you can steal from your own family members? I'm done." I made another attempt at argumentation. I'm sorely hoping someone will listen. Paul, however, shouted at me and interrupted me with a sweep of his hand. "Gather your belongings. You're finished here. Where you go doesn't matter to me. However, you will not remain in this mansion for another moment. You have half an hour to depart. I'll contact the police if you haven't left by then." I froze for a second, hoping my mother would say anything as I turned to face her. Anything. But she remained mute and just stood there. She appeared to be attempting to keep herself together as her arms were crossed firmly. More painful than Paul's comments could ever be was her silence. Eric appeared to be attempting to look unhappy as he stood off to the side. He shook his head as if he were the victim and muttered, "I just can't believe you do this to me." It was disgusting. I nearly charged at him, slamming that filthy face and erasing that arrogant grin. It was more than I could handle. With heavy footsteps, I turned and made my way upstairs to pack, putting my belongings in a duffel bag. I experienced a mixture of sadness, annoyance, and rage. Being expelled wasn't the only thing at stake. My mother was the subject of this. The one person who was meant to support me decided not to. She had nothing to say. She had nothing to do. She was simply allowing it to occur. Paul was waiting at the front entrance, watching me like a guard, making sure I wouldn't try anything when I returned downstairs. My mother was standing a few paces behind him. Tears were streaming down her cheeks, but she remained silent. I paused to gaze at her, hoping that she would somehow halt this, then put the bag over my shoulder. She didn't. She did nothing except watch it all unfold as I exited the building. Behind me, Eric mumbled, "It's unbelievable that he would do this." That was it. Nobody was going to pay attention. Nobody was going to defend me. I became aware that I was alone at that moment. With only a duffel bag and nowhere to go, I left that residence. My whole existence seemed to have been torn from beneath me. I had just graduated from college at the age of 22, and all of a sudden I was homeless. A falsehood had caused my family, who were meant to support me, to turn against me. I had nothing. No house, no help, and no clue what would happen next. The one certainty I had was that neither Paul nor Eric could ruin me. I'm grateful for Jake, my best buddy. He invited me over as soon as I phoned him. Without him, I'm not sure what I would have done. After all the years of putting up with Eric's shit, Jake had been my pillar of support, and now he was helping me get back on my feet. He gave me a blanket and told me to stay as long as I needed to, without asking many questions. The first week was difficult. Even though I continued to work part-time at a bookshop, my pay was insufficient to cover my rent and food expenses. During college, I worked part-time jobs and saved a small amount of money. I would crash on Jake's couch every night and try not to think about how my own mother had allowed this to occur. I would get up every morning, go to work, and act as though nothing was wrong. But I was a mess on the inside. The fact that my mother didn't call, however, was the worst. Not once. She didn't answer when I tried to contact her a few times. Not once. Finding out that Paul had most likely blocked my number didn't take long. Though I secretly began to accept that perhaps she wouldn't, I kept telling myself that she would eventually get in touch. I didn't have the luxury of moping, even though it ached like hell. I needed to decide how to proceed. I was lucky after sleeping on Jake's couch for over a month. My bookshop manager informed me that her husband's business was hiring for an entry-level IT position. It paid more than the bookshop, and the employment was consistent. I applied, and I was surprised to get hired. That was where my ascent began. I seized every chance to establish my worth. I volunteered for more training, stayed late, and learned everything I could. It wasn't simple. I was juggling a new job, my long-held resentment towards my family, and the fact that I was living alone for the first time. However, I didn't allow Eric's falsehoods define who I was. I managed to accumulate enough money to rent a small studio apartment after a few months. For the first time, I felt like I could breathe. After assisting me with my relocation, Jake said, "You're already doing better than half the people I know." It really helped to have my own area. It allowed me space to reflect and concentrate on my objectives. I stopped communicating with my family altogether in the interim. I stopped attempting to reach my mother and blocked Paul and Eric on social media. Though it wasn't a simple choice, I came to the realization that clinging to hope would only make me feel worse. It's okay if people want to believe Eric's falsehoods. I didn't want to waste any more effort attempting to convince them otherwise. I got a new work at a tech company with greater compensation and perks throughout the course of the following 2 years. My efforts to earn credentials paid off, and within 6 months I was promoted to project coordinator. In a long time, for the first time, I had the impression that I was making progress. However, the wounds from the incident persisted long after I moved on. I couldn't stop thinking about how my family wasn't around when I accomplished anything. My mother, who had always been my strongest ally, was unaware that I had moved into a nicer flat or obtained a fantastic job. It hurt. However, I reminded myself that they had chosen this life by putting their faith in Eric rather than me. In relation to Eric, I didn't hear much about him throughout those years, but I wasn't shocked by what I did hear. Every now and again, Jake saw residents of our former town who spoke of him, and the tales were the same. Eric continued to change jobs, mooching off Paul and blaming everyone else for his shortcomings. It seems that he had even spent all of his education funds on a business endeavor that didn't work out. Eric, classic. I was in a good place by the end of 4 years. At my tech company, I managed projects and earned more money than I ever imagined. I had purchased a modest home in a peaceful area. However, life has a humorous way of making things complete. Eric managed to pull me back into my family's misery just when I thought I had finally left it behind. One day, Jake received a call from an unidentified number. At first, he didn't give it any thought. Most likely some sort of spam call. But it was Eric when he picked up. Eric had apparently been looking for me for weeks. He had visited my former employer, contacted friends they had in common, even made an attempt to message me on LinkedIn. Eric explained to Jake why he needed to speak with me after he first disregarded him. His 2-year-old daughter required surgery for a cardiac issue. I was Eric's final hope in a terrible situation. I was first upset when Jake informed me. Following all Eric had done, he dared to seek me for assistance. Then Jake showed me a photo of a young girl with a gadget attached to her. However, I was unwilling to become engaged. I instructed Jake to tell Eric to do it on his own. Jake, however, wouldn't let it go. He added, "Look, man, this kid is innocent, but I know Eric is a piece of trash." None of this was requested by her. Will you truly allow her to suffer as a result of him? I detested Jake's correctness. Eric should not have made the girl suffer for his sins. However, Eric could have assumed that I would intervene and save the day without holding him accountable. He was not as familiar with me as he believed. I thus consented to see him. However, I did it as I wanted. We met in my office where I had authority. Since he attempted to ruin me, I wanted him to know how far I had come. I could scarcely recognize him when he entered. I had lost the arrogant, entitled stepbrother I had known. He was replaced with this sham of a man who appeared to have gone days without sleep. His clothing was rumpled. He had black bags under his eyes, and his hair was a complete mess. He started crying as soon as I shut the door. He's sobbing uncontrollably, pleading with me for assistance. He told me he tried everything, including selling his car, crowdfunding, and even asking distant family members for assistance. He was still $70,000 short, but he had scraped together approximately $30,000. The physicians were unsure about Maya's remaining time, since without the procedure, her condition would continue to worsen. Choking on his words, he added, "I know I don't deserve your help." "It's not about me, though. It concerns me. Alex, please. Her only hope is you." I gave him space to speak. I let him to cry, beg, and share his narrative of sobbing. I then gave him my terms when he eventually ran out of things to say. He had to tell the family everything if he wanted my assistance. Every deception, every trick. He had to be honest about how he took the college fund and set me up every time he accused me of whatever he had done. And he was required to do it in public. He lost the color in his face. "Please, Alex." "Oh," he said. "Anything else I'll do. I'll reimburse you. I'll agree to a deal. Don't force me to do that, please." I didn't move. "No money, no confession." "Take it or leave it," I said. He attempted to haggle. He pleaded with me to think again. On social media, he even promised to publicly apologize, rather than confronting the family. But I didn't back down. His half measures and shortcuts didn't appeal to me. He would have to accept responsibility for his actions if he wanted me to assist his daughter. He eventually consented after what seemed like an eternity. "All right," he said. His voice was hardly audible to me. "I will." I was clear that I wasn't going to believe him. "The family gathering was set up by you." I said, "The money will be transferred straight to the hospital only when you have told them the truth." "Not to you." He nodded, as if he wished to hide by crawling into a hole. He attempted to apologize once more as he was leaving. "I apologize, Alex," he said. "I can't take anything back for all I know. However, I want you to know that I'm sorry." I didn't answer. He apologized, but I didn't care. To me, words had no meaning. Because of his falsehoods, I had to start over from scratch for 4 years, and apologizing wouldn't make that go away. I contacted Jake after he departed to inform him of the situation. Jake said I was insane for ever thinking about assisting Eric. "Dude," he added, "the guy ruined your life. You are going to save him immediately. Without a doubt, you are a better person than I am." I said, "It's not about him. It has to do with that little girl. As I stated, she is not worthy of bearing the consequences of his errors." It was unclear to me if it was the complete truth. Yes. Part of me wanted to see Eric writhe, but I also wanted to aid the girl. I wanted him to confess what he had done in front of the family he had deceived. They had picked the golden boy over me, and I wanted them to realize the reality. A few days later, Eric texted me to let me know that he had scheduled the meeting for the weekend. "Everyone will be present," he wrote. "Mom, Dad, aunts, uncles, grandparents, and everyone else." When I received the message, I couldn't help but feel a knot in my gut. Since the day Paul expelled me, I hadn't seen any of them, but now was my opportunity to finally clear my reputation and expose the truth. Thus, everything keeps playing back in my mind where I am at the moment. The years of being used as a scapegoat, the charges, and the falsehoods. When Eric comes clean, I'm not sure how the family will respond. I don't care, to be honest. Their forgiveness is not at issue here. It's about letting me know the truth at last. When it's finished, I'll update everyone on how it went. Keep an eye out. The last update. Hello, everyone. As I promised then, this is the latest information. Thus, Saturday was chosen as the date for the family gathering, and I must say that the entire week before, it was a mental jolt. Getting my stepbrother to confess wasn't the only goal. It was about entering a room full of people who didn't even try to examine his falsehoods, since they had trusted him over me for 4 years. I don't know how they will respond, and to be honest, I don't give a damn. Relationship repair is not the point of this. It's about receiving the resolution I've been seeking. I nearly refused to get out of the car when I arrived at my mum and Paul's house. Everything about the location seemed like a horrible memory, yet I hadn't been there in 4 years. Paul had shouted for me to leave the front door from the driveway. I left it without my mother stopping me. Everything returned in a flash. I may have turned around and walked away if Jake hadn't been in the passenger seat. "Are you certain about this?" Jake inquired. He had no intention of stopping me. I wanted to make sure I was prepared. "Yes," I agreed. "Let's finish it." With one exception, the house was precisely the same when we arrived. The pictures of them and me were all gone. It hurt more than I thought it would. They seemed to have entirely eliminated me, as if I had never been a member of the family. The living area was already crowded with people. You name it. My mother, Paul, Eric, his grandparents, relatives, uncles, etc. When my mother saw me, her face brightened and she started crying. I resisted her attempt to embrace me. "That's not why I'm here." "Let's just finish this," I said. Paul was uneasy, as though he was unsure of how to respond. He started to say something, but I interrupted him. I told them not to worry. I'm here to listen to Eric be honest and go away, that's all. It was as though Eric wanted to vanish. He was avoiding eye contact with everyone in the room, fidgeting and perspiring. Twice. He gave me a look as if he thought I may reconsider and forgive him. I said nothing at all. After what seemed like an age, Eric finally began to speak. At first, he stammered something about how he had messed up and disappointed everyone. Paul attempted to intervene and comfort him, but I refused to listen. "You tell them the truth," I urged. "Everything." And he did. Eric explained everything slowly and carefully. He explained to them how he had spent his gap year drinking, shopping, and traveling, blowing the college cash. He said how, knowing that Paul would believe him, he became alarmed when Paul learned that the money was gone and chose to place the blame on me. He acknowledged that he planted the USB drive, faked the emails, and made up the story that he saw me spying in the office. By the time he was done, the room was completely quiet. Paul appeared to have been smacked. His grandparents, Eric's parents, were sobbing, most likely because they knew they had been paying for all of Eric's missteps. My relatives and aunts were looking at Eric as if they had no idea who he was. I wasn't listening to any of them, though. My mother was being watched by me. Her expression was a mixture of sadness, remorse, and bewilderment. Whispering no, she continued to shake her head, as if the things she was hearing were unbelievable. When she finally realized the truth, I expected to feel satisfied, but instead, I felt empty. After Eric finished, I got up and took out my phone. All I needed to do was press submit because I had previously scheduled the hospital transfer. "The money is there," I remarked, pointing to the confirmation screen. "Mia is going to have surgery. This is where we're done." My mum lost it at that point. "Please, Alex." Grabbing my arm, she said, "I'm very sorry. I ought to have trusted you. I failed you. Please don't leave like this." Paul tried to leap into Alex. "I don't know what to say." "I was mistaken. I will send you a check for twice the amount of the college money. Take any necessary action to put this right." Eric even made an effort to apologize. By this time, he was weeping and promised to try to make it up to me for the rest of his life. I am aware that I wrecked all of his words, but I appreciate your assistance. I will always remember this. I simply glanced at them all. My mother, who had refrained from speaking when I most needed her. Paul, who had dismissed me without hesitation. 4 years ago, someone named Eric stole everything from me. If only I could have heard their apologies. They had lost all significance. I gave my mother a chilly scowl, wrenched my arm out of her hold, and left without saying a word or turning around. Jake drove silently back to my apartment, following me. He ultimately diffused the situation when we arrived. "Are you all right?" he inquired. "Yes," I said, and I meant it for the first time in years. I haven't had any communication with my family since. I banned their social media profiles, emails, and phone numbers. Every day, my mum sends me lengthy, tearful emails about how she cries herself to sleep and how much she misses me. To compensate for the suffering and interest, Paul has written many checks, initially for $80,000, and later for $160,000. I didn't think twice and shipped them back. Even Eric's grandparents have occasionally visited my workplace, although security is aware that they should be turned away. They write notes expressing their regret and feelings of guilt for spoiling Eric and allowing him to get away with too much. I don't give a damn. When it counted, they trusted him. I only need to know that. Jake informed me that Mia's procedure went well. I'm very delighted for her, and she's recuperating nicely. In all of this, she is innocent, and I pray she doesn't end up like her father. According to reports, Eric returned to living with his mother in a different state. He has been finding it difficult to maintain a work, and his ex-wife won't allow him to visit Mia unsupervised. If I claimed to feel sorry for him, I would be lying. For my part, I'm doing great. I recently made a down payment on a property in Seattle and received another promotion at work. I will be leading the new office that my company is building there. Leaving all the toxicity behind and continuing on is a satisfying feeling. I occasionally hear advice to forgive my relatives, particularly my mother. She was in a difficult situation. She didn't know what to believe, they claim. However, 4 years of treachery cannot be undone by apology. I can't get the family back by saying sorry. The broken trust was gone from me, or the years I was by myself repairing my life. Rebuilding certain bridges is simply not worth it. Living well is said to be the best kind of retaliation. And I am doing perfectly well, I must say. Alex, thank you for reading. Story 3. I showed there with a surprise announcement because my parents had forgotten to invite me to the family reunion. How are things going, everyone? This whole situation has been killing me, so I need to let it out a little. Honestly, I feel like I've been the odd one out from birth. I'm a 28-year-old woman who is the youngest of 3 siblings. Allow me to illustrate the situation for you. It's not an edgy, rebellious way for me to be the odd one out in my family, as if I deliberately tried to be different. My sister and brother simply seem to constantly fit this stereotype of what a successful child ought to look like. They had good credentials and stable careers. Perfect small families make up the suburbia fantasy. I've chosen a different route in the interim, not the sort that gets boasted about at family meals or shown on slick Christmas cards. Ryan, my 35-year-old brother, works as a marketing executive and mails. He has one of those professions where no one really knows what he does, but because he's constantly on Zoom calls and discussing strategy, everyone assumes it's important. In addition to having 2 cute children and a home right out of a home remodeling program, he married his college love. Next is my sister Emily, a 32-year-old woman engineer, who is married to a similarly accomplished man who may as well be an engineer. They are the type of people that throw dinner parties with themed desserts and matching china, based on his analytical and meticulous nature. Afterward, there is me. I started working as a freelance graphic designer 2 years ago after quitting my corporate job. It is not ostentatious. I create digital assets, branding collateral, and logos for small enterprises. I adore it, but it's not the type of thing that will make me wealthy. It's plenty to cover the expenses and maintain my happiness, which is what I consider to be the purpose of life. I share a modest rental home with Ethan, my partner of 5 years. We're comfortable and happy, even though we're not making a lot of money. My family doesn't view it that way, which is the issue. They view life as being about tradition, stability, and moving up the corporate ladder. They don't really know what to do with me because my decisions don't match that story. They're not being very cruel about it. They're not courteous enough for that. There is, however, a constant undertone of criticism, with remarks such as, "Oh, that's nice, but don't you miss having a steady paycheck?" Or, "You'd have greater security if you went back to a 9-to-5. They behave as though my life is a passing stage that I will eventually outgrow. I've spent years ignoring the subtle jabs and attempting to keep my composure when I realize how difficult the real world is. I know people just don't understand, so I've been able to brush it off for the most part. And to be honest, it wasn't until a few weeks ago that I discovered how invisible I am to them that I realized how much it had been accumulating. It began on a typical Tuesday evening. When I came across my cousin Chloe's tale on Instagram, I was half watching a sitcom in the background. We have large family reunions like this a few times a year. Everyone gathered in one person's home to catch up, eat, and laugh. Naturally, my aunts, uncles, All of my cousins and my brother and sister were present, along with their wives. It appeared to be the type of wild enjoyment that brings up memories even as it's occurring. However, something was lacking. Or, more accurately, someone. Mr. No One tagged me, I wasn't present, and it didn't seem like I had been invited at all. I initially believed that I could have overlooked the memo. Our family group chat is constantly a hive of activity with updates and ideas. Perhaps the invitation was lost in the never-ending barrage of texts. To make sure, I texted Emily and Ryan. Emily is slower than Ryan, although she never totally ignores me, and Ryan typically answers straight immediately. However, nothing this time. Neither of them responded for hours. The sinking sensation began to set in, that moment when you begin to notice something is off yet are reluctant to acknowledge it. I made the decision to go directly to the source the next day. I gave my mother, Grace, a call. In an attempt to be informal, I inquired about how things were doing and whether there had been any recent family get-togethers. There was a long silence. "Oh, you mean the reunion?" she asked. "Sweetheart, we didn't anticipate your want to attend. Your little freelance business keeps you quite occupied." The clinking of plates and muted voices in the background were familiar sounds from my family's parties, which often lasted over a weekend. But her tone was too informal. My head felt as though a switch had been flicked. Busy. I had plenty of time to spend with my family, and even if I were, wouldn't I still be in charge of that? How come they didn't ask me at all? I questioned her about it in an attempt to find out why they thought I wouldn't want to be there. She seemed to be attempting to minimize the entire situation as her tone changed to something more lighthearted. She said, "We just didn't want to bother you. We also assumed it wasn't a huge concern because you've missed a few occasions in the past. It was such a dumb excuse. This has nothing to do with skipping a holiday or an impromptu supper due to work. I would have done everything to be a part of this full-fledged family reunion." However, following that call, they didn't even consider including me. For what seemed like an eternity, I sat in my kitchen, mentally reliving the exchange. This was not the first time such an incident has occurred. Plans for several of the holidays appeared to center around Ryan and Emily's families. I was, in fact, added as an afterthought. I had always persuaded myself that it wasn't deliberate, that they simply found it simpler to concentrate on those who had children or had more conventional lifestyles. Now, however, it was evident. Convenience wasn't the point here. It was intentional. The more I considered it, the more I began to make connections. They didn't seem to have forgotten about me throughout the planned flurry. No, this was deliberate. I didn't belong there, they determined. To be honest, that hurt more than I wanted to acknowledge, and at least not enough to try to include me. I made an effort to divert my attention by immersing myself in my job, but each time I looked on social media, I saw another reunion picture or video. It resembled a highlight reel of all the things I had overlooked, all because I was deemed unfit by someone. The reunion was no longer the main focus. Years of feeling like an afterthought were the subject of this. Years of exclusion. For what purpose? Because Ryan and Emily took a more conventional route than I did. Because I put my happiness above a lucrative career. I detested it. I wasn't searching for a medal or continual approval, so it was annoying. All I wanted was to be taken seriously. In the hopes that Ethan would tell me I was exaggerating, I vented to him about it. Rather, he became more irate than I had ever seen him. He paced the living room saying, "This isn't okay. This is not fair to you." I laughed, in part because it was so kind, and in part because I knew it wouldn't change anything, when he even offered to contact my mom himself. Nothing was going to change the fact that my family had already decided where I stood. Nevertheless, I'm feeling something I haven't felt in days thanks to Ethan's encouragement, as if I truly had a choice. "I should just turn up," he says. "It's okay if they didn't invite you. You may still remind them that you are a member of this family, though." I say, he says, "It's alluring. I'm not going to lie. There's something alluring about the prospect of unexpectedly showing up and forcing them to face me. However, what if I really make matters worse? What if all it proves is what they think I am? That I'm making it about me or that I'm overly sensitive? However, why should I allow them to remove me?" Showing up, in my opinion, is more about stating my presence and refusing to go away peacefully than it is about seeking retribution. And I have a cause that seems more important than the drama if I do choose to go. A few weeks ago, Ethan and I were engaged. I've been waiting for the appropriate time to tell my family in person, so we haven't informed anyone yet. However, it now seems like until I force it, that ideal time will never arrive. Here's the problem, though. What if the solution isn't simply turning up? Maybe I should allow them to exclude me if that's what they desire. Perhaps that's the only thing that will save my sanity. There are still a few days left in the reunion, so I still have the opportunity to go. I have time to make up my mind. I'm trapped now. Should I risk the discomfort and tension in order to assert my personal space? Or should I remain at home and let them question why I failed to show up? As if they made me question why I hadn't been invited in the first place. To be honest, I have no idea what to do. How would you respond? One update. Hello once more. Since the majority of you requested a follow-up, I arrived with an update. Okay. So this is what I did. After pacing my kitchen for much too long, trying to decide whether to attend the reunion or not, at last, I made up my mind to do it. Call it courage. Call it obstinacy. However, I'm not going to miss this one. They'll have to cope with me turning there, even if they didn't want me there. It's not about making a scene or establishing a point, to be honest. Reminding myself that I have every right to be there is the goal. Like I was preparing for a heist, I began organizing my entry. To make it appear as though I had always planned to go, I made a batch of cookies, something straightforward, yet kind. I informed Ethan that I had to do this alone, even though he volunteered to accompany me for support. He would be only a phone call away if things went wrong. It seemed like it took longer to travel to my folks' place than it did. I had mentally reviewed the strategy 100 times. Enter. Be natural. Turn over the cookies and act as though I had a valid purpose for being there. Easy, isn't it? But questions began to surface as I drew nearer. What if they created a commotion? What if I was ordered to go? Even worse, what if I received no recognition at all? Through the windows, I could see everyone mingling and laughing as if it were the biggest event of the year when I eventually pulled up. I took a deep breath, picked up the cookie box from the passenger seat, and headed for the house. For a brief moment, the noise struck me like a wall as soon as I entered. I went unnoticed. As I stood there, absorbing everything, someone looked over, and then someone else did. Heads turned towards me as the commotion gradually subsided. The first person to approach me was my mother, Grace. Her voice was higher than normal. "You made it, I see. How unexpected." She didn't give me a hug, and her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. She gave him a brief pat on the arm before taking a step back. It was uncomfortable, as if she was attempting to decide what to do with me now that I was present without permission. Yes, I did intend to drop by. Grinning, I held out the cookie box and said, "I brought these to everybody." Before vanishing into the kitchen, she snatched the box and muttered something about placing them on the dining table. As I stood there attempting to fit in, I could feel the pressure of everyone's looks. Some nodded courteously at me. Others completely avoided making eye contact. Emily was across the room talking to an aunt, but my brother Ryan was nowhere to be seen. She gave me a single, inscrutable glance before returning her attention to her friends. I headed for the dining room, where a table was piled high with food. All of that made my package of cookies appear ridiculously out of place. Nevertheless, I put them down and stood there for a while, attempting to think of what to do. I heard two aunts whispering close to the corridor as I turned to exit the dining room. "Did they not intentionally invite her?" one of them asked. The other swiftly shushed her. I'd heard enough, though. I had to resist the need to turn around and face them as my chest constricted. Rather, I took out my phone and headed towards the living room, pretending to read my messages. When they saw me, some of my younger cousins stopped around to greet me. They appreciated the cookies, inquired about my freelancing work, and mentioned that they had seen some of my designs online. This might not be as horrible as it seemed for a little while. However, Ryan eventually arrived. He hesitated for a moment when he spotted me, then forced a kind grin. "Oh," he said, "I had no idea you were coming. I wanted to surprise everyone." I echoed his tone in my response. After an hour or so, the mood changed once more. Emily caught everyone's attention with a loud clap of her hands. "I have some wonderful news to share, everyone." The group became silent as she revealed that she was expecting her second child, her face beaming. Cheers broke out. Everyone applauded, and my mother appeared on the verge of bursting with happiness. Hugs and toasts were part of the extensive celebration. And me? I was once again invisible as I stood there. I saw everyone swoon over Emily, congratulating her and making jokes about baby names. Nobody even gave me a sidelong glance. My mother, who had been devoted to Emily, didn't even recognize me. I didn't even seem to be in the room. Something inside of me exploded at that moment. I wasn't upset. Not in the conventional sense anyhow. I had just finished. I'm done being ignored. If they weren't going to involve me, I'm done being treated like I didn't matter. I would make them come visit me. So I did what any respectable family member who had been forgotten would do. I took a glass from the drinks table, cleared my throat, and gave it a loud clink with a fork. The entire room froze at the loud noise. I smiled and mimicked Emily's announcing manner. "I have something to offer as well, since today we're all sharing significant news." They turned to face me, but most of them appeared to be wondering what the devil I was about to do, rather than being excited or curious. I didn't care, though. Making sure my engagement ring was in the light, I raised my left hand. 2 weeks ago, I got engaged. Even though my chest was on fire, I spoke steadily, but because I wasn't even invited, I suppose nobody here would have known. For a second, that part was like a bomb. I could feel the weight of their looks, and nobody spoke. The stillness was finally broken by a few dispersed claps, largely from my younger relatives, who seemed genuinely delighted for me. However, the joy Emily felt for her was even more intense than the electricity. Significant news. A faint smile that virtually shouted damage control was squeezed out of my mom's face as her face clenched. "Oh," she remarked, "that's lovely. Why did you not inform us earlier?" "I didn't think you'd care," I said, looking her in the eye. With a grim face, Ryan, who had been standing close to the kitchen doorway, moved forward. "This has nothing to do with you," he stated sternly. "You have to make everything about yourself all the time," Emily muttered, her eyes darting about as if I'd made her look foolish in front of the neighbors. "This wasn't the time for that," she went on. She replied, "You couldn't just give me a moment." I then realized that my news had not angered them. They were upset that I had the audacity to interrupt their flawless story. It had nothing to do with my absence or engagement. Control and maintaining my position were the main goals. I knew then and there that I would no longer keep quiet. I was not going to give up. I responded to my brother, ignoring Emily. "Really, as I don't recall receiving an invitation to this little gathering. But without me, you all appear to be doing just fine." As my mom's polite facade began to fall apart, Emily avoided eye contact and glanced down at her drink. However, before she could speak, Chloe, one of my cousins, raised her voice. Chloe's voice was forceful as she stated, "She has every right to be upset. What did you anticipate if you didn't invite her?" Her words lingered in the atmosphere, and it seemed like someone else understood for the first time. Although it wasn't much, it was plenty to shatter the meticulously crafted facade that my family had been maintaining. I was not going to stay and allow them to turn this into another round of, since I knew when I had made my point. Take a look at her striking style. Ryan wasn't finished yet. "You cannot simply arrive and take over the evening in this manner." His voice rose as he said. I paused, allowing their charges and justifications to reverberate off of me. I then reached for my coat. "What do you know?" My voice was steady as I spoke. I believed that tonight may be a pivotal moment for us, but now I realize I was mistaken. Preserve your ideal bubble. I've given up on trying to fit in. I picked up my coat and left without waiting for an answer. It struck me as I stepped out after slamming the door behind me. For the first time in years, I had finally done it. I defended myself without apology, and that felt amazing. My phone started vibrating as I arrived to my car. There was a message from Ryan. "As usual, you're being self-centered." I felt angry and hurt at the same time as I glanced at the screen. I typed before I could second-guess myself. "And as usual, you're being predictable." Then press send. Even though it wasn't much, it seemed like the beginning of taking back my voice. I kept thinking about it as I drove home. What follows? Even though Ethan and I had been engaged for weeks, it seemed unfeasible to organize a wedding with them present. Who should I invite? Mom, Ryan, Emily. Were they deserving of their presence? Perhaps it was time to start creating the sort of family I truly want, and to stop waiting for them to treat me like family. Ethan was waiting for me when I arrived home. He didn't press me to speak straight away or ask me a ton of questions. He simply gave me a hug. The embrace that gives you the impression that you're secure now. I filled him in on everything while we sat on the couch. I thought he would be angry. However, he simply listened. That was something you had to do. When I was done, he said, "This has been suppressed for far too long." He was correct. The simple part, though, had been defending myself in the heat of the moment. The next step was more difficult. It was strange that my family was silent. Nothing. No calls, no texts. I waited for someone, anybody, to get in touch for days. However, I felt as though I had fallen from the sky. I initially believed they were giving me time to calm down. Perhaps they were trying to figure out how to apologize after realizing their mistake. However, it became evident that wasn't the case as the days stretched into a week. They didn't wait to make contact. They were anticipating my stumbling return. That's my family's problem. Their unwritten rule has always been that they are never at blame for anything. It's up to you to make things right if you're upset, and I've played along for as long as I can remember. I wasn't going to do it this time, though. I had had enough of being the only one who worked hard. I chose to put my attention on the folks who genuinely cared about me instead. After the reunion, Ethan proposed that we have a modest engagement celebration for friends and some family members who had been in touch. I paused. Without my parents and siblings around, it felt strange to celebrate something so intimate. However, the more I considered it, the more I saw that they had no right to be involved, not when they were unable to even recognize my news. We organized a small, intimate party in our lawn. Only a few of close buddies. A few. Although it was simple, it was ideal. A few of my relatives, including Chloe, who had silently helped me through the entire situation, joined Ethan's family. They offered real joy, hugs, and pleasant grins. I felt honored for simply being myself for the first time in a long time. Chloe grabbed me away at the party. She had seen all that had happened during the reunion. "I apologize for how you were treated by everyone," she added. "That wasn't fair to you. In addition, I believe that what you mentioned was necessary. Even if only one person receives it, I'm thankful that they do. So yes, this is my current location. I am aware that my parents will not tolerate this, because they weren't invited. They will not tolerate the party in silence. What are they going to do next? I don't know, but I'll provide an update if anything occurs. I'm just savoring the tranquility for the time being." The last update. Hello everyone, I have returned with an update. The engagement celebration, however, was just what I needed. In years, for the first time, being surrounded by people who genuinely cared about me made me feel truly celebrated. It was modest, straightforward, and brimming with affection. My family get-togethers never seemed to be anything. Naturally, however, harmony with my family would never endure. Ryan texted me a few days following the party. It was succinct and direct. "We must speak." I debated whether or not to reply as I looked at the message for a long time. A part of me was unwilling to reopen that wound, but another part of me wanted to listen to him. "What about his response?" I finally asked, and it came almost instantly. "At the reunion, you caused a stir. Mom and Emily weren't treated fairly there. It was not a recognition of their treatment of me. I'm not sorry for being left out. More deflection, please." I inhaled deeply before typing my response. Being excluded in the first place wasn't fair. "We can discuss if you'd like. I will not, however, apologize for defending myself." I was left unread by him. This is the revised version, which is bolder, more informal, and in the past tense. My mother called a few hours later. She began as I took it up, instantly speculating about its purpose. "How come your father and I weren't invited to your engagement celebration?" It nearly made me chuckle. I shot her line back at her saying, I didn't think you'd want to come." "You dare not do that," she fired back. "Are your parents present?" "Naturally. We ought to have been present. How awkward is it to hear your cousin tell you about it? It's embarrassing, similar to using Instagram to learn about the reunion." "I lost my temper. I wasn't invited to it by you. I don't think you're dying to celebrate me, so pardon me." She stated that was different. "We assumed you were occupied. However, this was deliberate." "You're correct. It was deliberate. Because I invited those who genuinely support me," I remarked. A protracted hush ensued. "We've always supported you," she added. "We disagree with every small decision, so you think. We don't give a damn." We were worthy of being present. She couldn't see me roll my eyes, but I did. "Assistance. Do you intend to refer to my work as a hobby? Excluding me from family gatherings. Unless it's convenient, I'm acting like an extra who doesn't matter. You're not on my side. If you continue to drive us away, you are endorsing the non-existent version of yourself. Don't count on our support." After a moment, she said, "Perhaps we wouldn't be having this discussion if you had been there in the first place," I answered. After that, there wasn't much else to say. I hung up after she said something about checking up on things. Planning began to pick up steam again within a day following the phone with my mother and the group chat, which I had conveniently been excluded from during the reunion. It was more than just family updates and sporadic memes this time. It has to do with me. It seemed that Ryan and Emily had decided to blame me for the turmoil surrounding the reunion. Messages like, "It's always about her," and "She made the whole thing into a circus," began sending me screenshots and flying about with Chloe, who had been discreetly encouraging of me since the party. Even though I shouldn't have been shocked, it still stung. Observing the text so clearly written. "She's making things more difficult than they have to be." It was written by Emily. Ryan followed up. "All she wants is attention. Normal." These were the same individuals who didn't think I was worthy of an invitation and who didn't even bother to inquire about my feelings on my exclusion. And now it was me who was making things hard. Ethan asked me what was going on when he saw me pacing the living room with my phone in hand. I showed him the messages. "Whoa, they're really digging in," he remarked. "Yes, they're not even attempting to conceal it," he inquired. "How would you like to handle it?" I was tired of allowing them to change the story so that I was the antagonist. I said, "I'm going to call them out. They can speak directly to me if they choose to discuss me in this manner. Or to the group chat, I suppose." I accessed the group chat and perused the many messages that were directed at me. What I typed was this: "It's interesting that even though I wasn't invited to the reunion, I'm the one being held responsible for creating trouble. Well, let's act like I'm the problem. Perhaps you might have just included me before sending, rather than bringing me up behind my back." In order to ensure that everyone saw the receipts, I included Chloe's screenshots. Then I emailed it and waited without hesitation. The conversation quickly became heated. It was Ryan who answered first. As if he hadn't been disparaging me 5 minutes before, he wrote, "Of course, this isn't how families solve problems." Then Emily arrived. "What did you imagine would happen if you shared those screenshots? You're only making matters worse." "Oh, I'm not sure, Emily," I said. "Perhaps I hoped it would reveal the hypocrisy of you all ignoring me and then playing victim. It's funny how it works." Ryan resumed typing. I didn't stay to read it, but it was probably just another sermon about family devotion. Instead, I sent my mother a last message that only said, "Open my contact." I hope this clarifies why I blocked her after finishing. I proceeded through the list. Ryan, Emily, even the actual group chat. I hit block on each one, seeing the links vanish one by one. After finishing, I released a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding and threw my phone onto the couch. Feeling better, Ethan leaned against the doorway and asked, "To be honest?" "Yes." As I sank onto the cushions, I spoke. "I don't have to deal with it directly anymore, but they'll undoubtedly find another way to twist things." He approached and took a seat beside me. "You defended yourselves. That's what counts. Now let them handle their own issue." I felt a little lighter for the first time in days. It would take time for my family to transform, perhaps never. However, I refused to continue to shrink in order to conform to their expectations. If it meant losing some relationships in order to defend myself, then be it. I could at least breathe now. For the time being, Ethan and I are beginning to discuss our wedding plans. I keep avoiding the subject, even though we've been engaged for months. It is daunting to consider the specifics, particularly the possibility of implicating my family. However, given everything that has transpired, I have come to the realization that I do not need to engage them. We have the freedom to arrange this day whatever we see fit. We intend to keep it modest, away from all the drama and criticism. Only Ethan's family, a few close friends, and the few relatives who have always been there for me. No complicated guest list, no large venue. It was just a little ceremony with folks who truly cared about us in a friend's garden. It seems right, even if it's not what I had in mind as a child. It seems genuine. I choose not to extend the invitation to my family. Although it's a difficult choice, it is essential. They have often expressed their lack of regard for me. So why should I allow them to witness one of the most significant days of my life up close? I'm not giving them access to my happiness in exchange for their actions. Naturally, news is already beginning to spread. Naturally, my mom phones me in a panic after learning about it from a relative. "You're not inviting us as much as you used to then?" As if she's in shock, she asks. "Indeed, I'm not." Simply, I say. "Why?" She insists. "Your family is us." Since this day is dedicated to honoring those who have supported me, I respond. "And that's not you at the moment." She attempts to argue with me and guilt-trip me into altering my views, but I refuse to back down. "This has nothing to do with punishing you," I inform her. "I'm trying to protect myself. I must act in my own best interests." It is not well received by her. I am called ungrateful by her. Accuses me of abandoning those who care about me and of destroying the family. I don't let her remarks stay, though, for once. I will not allow her to change the story. The idea of getting married away from my parents seems weird. I won't pretend it doesn't hurt occasionally, but when I mentally visualize the day, I feel less depressed and more at ease. With Ethan by my side, I envision myself surrounded by love and encouragement, and I understand that's how family should feel. It has nothing to do with blood or duty. It's about who is there for you when you need them. My parents, Ryan and Emily, appear to have less influence on my decisions the further I place them from me. The pain of my mom's guilt trips has diminished. Emily's passive-aggressive social media posts and Ryan's snarky remarks seem hollow. I don't even give them a glance. My time is better spent on other things. But that doesn't mean it's simple. Sometimes I remember how much fun we had together before things became so difficult. I miss the short-lived versions of my family that gave me a sense of belonging and made me laugh. However, I've realized that those times no longer define who they are. What counts is how they treat me now, and I can't continue to act like everything is all right until they're ready to change. I'm concentrating on the future for now, on organizing a wedding that suits us, creating a life devoid of their toxicity. Perhaps we can try again when they reappear, but for now, I'm going to keep my peace, even if letting go is required. So here I am, making my own decision. Although it's not always simple, it's worthwhile, because I have learned one thing in the end. You don't have to accept anything less than what you are worthy of, even if it means separating from the folks you assumed would be there forever.